I'm going to back up for the recording. Welcome to Intersectionality Talks, which is a thing I just talked about off the recording. Check out our website if you don't know what I'm talking about. It will be linked. Actually, if you found this recording, you found the website. All right. So let me tell you about the format, and then I'm going to introduce Dr. Gray. So the format for today is pretty informal. The first half hour or so, Dr. Gray and I are just going to be chatting sort of like interview podcast style. I've got some questions that I took from people who are going to come and from reading her work. And then the rest of the time will be devoted to Q&A. Feel free to use the chat. The chat is open. I'm going to try to keep an eye on that as Kishana and I are talking, so I can bring in those threads of discussion as we're going. We do have everybody's mics and cameras off for safety Zoom bombing reasons right now, but we'll when we get to question and answer, we'll be cutting those on a case-by-case basis so that people can jump into the chat and whatnot. So introductions. Let's see. All right. So Kishana Gray is currently assistant professor in the Department of Communication and Gender and Women's Studies program at the University of Illinois in Chicago. Now transitioning to UK. All right. She's also a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. She is the author of Race, Gender, and Deviance at Xbox Live and the co-editor of Feminism in Play and Woke Gaming, Digital Challenges to Oppression and Social Justice, and Intersectional Tech. So if you want any of these books, the PSU library at Lamson has them once I return them. But her work is fantastic. I'm excited for this conversation. Welcome, Kishana. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. I'm so honored to be here in this space. Thank you for inviting me to share in this lovely series that y'all have put together. Fantastic.
We're thrilled to have you. So let's see. I mean, just to start on a lighter note, since that's been the note that we've been having before our time started. So not only are you a scholar of gaming, you're also a gamer. What do you like to play? Like, what are you playing right now when you can find time and when you can relax?
I play all the time. So it's still lit up because once I'm done, I'm going to get back on it. I was playing right before we...
Glad you have time. Glad they're not working you that hard.
Gotta make time. And I think that's something, my mentor, Samantha Blackman, one of my mentors, she's at Purdue. She's in English, I believe, is where she's at there. But she was like, you would never tell like a person who does like prison research, like you don't go to the prison and you don't talk to like incarcerated humans, you don't like you wouldn't say that. So she was like, of course you're going to play games. You're going to interact in gaming spaces because you're a gaming scholar. So those are the things that, that I have to do. So there was a time where I was like, I can't play these games, but that was because, we're programmed, for the stigma, people are like, oh, gaming's not that serious. And so you had to show yourself as like a serious scholar. But then when you play the game, people think you're not serious, so I had to really like combat that narrative and, dismantle like that narrative so people could say, well, what I'm doing is like, sure, it's play, sure, it's fun, but I'm constantly working, I'm constantly, engaging like in a very like, ethnographic, observant, researchery kind of way. But what am I playing right now? So, mostly console gaming. I get into PC a little bit, but that's not like my go-to. I think a lot of times, like what we grow up with is like kind of like what we continue with. So, we didn't really grow up with like, like a computer like in the house or anything. So we had like consoles, so Nintendos and Segas, PlayStations and stuff. So these days I'm playing, I love Apex Legends, and I love shooters too, so people are like, somebody like, trying to say I was like a low class gamer because I wasn't playing like the really smarty art. I'm like, first off, what we not gonna do is like put all these tiers and all these weights on games. So however you play, that's just how you play, and you're a gamer no matter what. So I like, Smite, Apex Legends, Rogue Company. Spirits have been trying to get me on Valorant, but I'm so clunky and awkward on PC gaming. Like I don't know what to do. And so
it's a whole different world. Yeah,
it's a whole whole different world, and I'm so not good at it. And so, I like watching my kids like play Roblox and like Minecraft, because it's just so
Mhm.
interesting how they can have fun, and I don't get it, and so they kind of just allow me to be in their space to understand the world. So yeah, that's what I'm gaming on nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Yeah, and if for those of you who are coming for the intersectionality and have no clue about the gaming, like Google Apex Legends later. Like it is
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
the sparring for market share between Apex Legends and Fortnite, and the birth of that genre out of gosh, what's
PUBG.
PUBG, out of PUBG.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Is just I think
Fascinating.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Copyright issues galore.
Oh my gosh, so good, especially for folks who love those conversations. So good.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. And it's wild. And all three of those games are like right up there in streaming and what's happening with Twitch and sort of like the explosion of gaming. So yeah, good for anybody who needs to challenge your cred. That's a good way to flex that. Yeah. Martha points out in the chat, as a parent of two teen kiddos, I feel like everything I know about gaming is in service to them. It's like, and then like playing Xbox is opportunity to connect with the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's okay. And that's absolutely okay. I think that's why, if my kids were in Minecraft all day, I didn't play it. So I was like, well, let me download it and play it, so I can be there, like with them. So a lot of, I go to where they are, if they want to have like a different kind of like game. And because we, used to do board games, like for our family game night. And I like that physical connection. I like the touching and the feeling of, actual stuff away from the digital. But I'm like, they don't like that. So I'm not going to force them. I don't want to be that thing. We're going to have family game night right now. You got to come and play this Uno right now. No, it's okay. We'll just go to Minecraft. Yeah, it's all good.
So shifting to talking about your work, I mean, not that we haven't been talking about your work, we have. So ethnography is huge for you and for what you do.
It's my job.
Can you talk about that? About like how it's part of your process, what it lets you do?
I'd love to. Oh my gosh, where do I start? My love for ethnography came from, I didn't know I liked ethnography because I think most of us, we don't know what research methods are. We kind of learn these things as we're going. Even in like the undergraduate research methods class, it's such like a crash course into like everything, like all these methods are coming together. And I think the only thing that really stuck was like probably like survey methods. Like, you write up a survey, you ask people some questions. So I didn't even really get, like the context of like qualitative like research, right? So I didn't really learn that like until graduate school, but it was like a class project, where we had to do, it was like qualitative methods, we were learning all these kinds of things. And I fell in love with ethnography, because this was like, I think it lends itself well to my strengths and what I'm good at, kind of like just being among people, observing, watching, talking to, interviewing, and really just getting like that deep dive, like into like cultures, right? So if we were to go like one-on-one, what's ethnography? It's like really like an in-depth exploration of some subculture, right? So, so we have mainstream like dominant cultures, right? Most especially, so it's really like, the spin-off of that. So if we wanted to understand how this culture does this, you have to spend time in there, right? So let's, we can kind of compare the methods. So let's say if we wanted to understand like the lives of people like in online gaming, right? We could do a survey, right? We can construct it and construct the questions, and we could send that out, and we could say, oh, 40% of people do this, 60% of like people do that. And that's beautiful. That's cool. Because, I'm never one, I'm not like one that like privileges like a method over the other. Although a lot of folks do. Now, for those of you who are going to go to grad school soon, you're going to be well versed into like the competing camps of it's really like PlayStation versus like Xbox. Like they're like those kinds of camps, qualitative versus quantitative. Like these folks like people, or even like PC and console. You got PC, the master race and all that stuff. Like it's crazy wild. But I fell in love, with ethnography. We had to do this class project, and we were supposed to like spend some time in a space where that like we occupy. I think it was more like autoethnographic, right? And so I think they wanted to show us, the professor wanted to just show us like the systematic way of like analyzing, and trying to like do like the trying to make data of things like in our everyday life, right? That's a problematic statement, but I'm gonna just leave it at that for right now, because that's another conversation for another day. But just how do we like make sense like of the stuff around us? How would we like code like the things that you're doing, right? So the time that you're spending in a space, so there are some ways that you can quantify that, but the qualitative part will then ask like why. So why are you spending like all that time in that space? Why do you play this game? Why are you interacting like in that manner? So I think that I feel like they balance each other like very well. So whenever I started like doing like this earliest like ethnography, of course I didn't know what I was doing, even in graduate school. Even when I defended my dissertation, I had no idea what I was doing or really like talking about, right? I had no idea. But I've been doing like the same ethnography for 10 years. And I think that's what's so cool about this latest book, Intersectional Tech. Because I think that's sticking to like the authenticness of like ethnography. You don't just like go in there for like interview somebody and then leave and call that an ethnography. Like, so if we were to think about the going back to what the anthropologists like did, they would spend significant amounts of time, like years even, with like a culture of people, within a space, within an area, really like understand like the culture. So imagine like, for instance, if we wanted to like learn about I don't know, cooking practices, like abuela's cooking practices, or our granny's cooking practices. You'll go to the kitchen and spend time with them, or go to the market and see how they cook indoors and see how they cook outdoors, and see how like food changes based on how you're cooking, and see how like the seasons impact like the things you're cooking, because the things that you're growing impacts the thing that you like. So you have to spend time and like understand like changes like in a space like over time. So if I were to be like one and done with the ethnography that I was doing like in Xbox Live, I wouldn't have gotten a sense of really how the space has changed, and how the people are influencing the space, and how the space influenced them, and how like like culture like influenced the things that they played, or even how like the technology. I think that's what's like really dope about intersectional tech, because a lot of times like with the ethnography, a lot of folks focus so traditional ethnographers like anthropologists really focus like on the people, right? And so I feel like what I'm adding is like a digital ethnographer, like if you will. I'm really focusing too like on how like the tech is impacting the space, and how people like interact or engage in this space based on the tech. So think about like an example from the Tech Fail chapter. It may be like chapter 5 if anybody has the book. Turn to chapter 5 now. But there was a in the lab, I had some friends over to the lab who identify as Black and deaf and woman, right? So they were in the lab, and like we were like all playing the game, and we were having fun. We'd done this before. We're all like friends. We've done this before. This is like the first time that they like gamed like in this way, like with me. So I really thought I was doing good. I identified like a game that had like captions, and I'm just like, here, this is gonna be like a great game, right? Well, there was a moment where I'm trying to think. I don't want to pseudonyms in the book. I think Kim is what I call my friend. Okay, thank you. So Kim was something was happening in the game, and Kim wasn't able to progress. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, like, what's the problem, Kim? So I don't communicate using sign language. So there were some friends there who was translating, interpreting, excuse me, for her. So I realized that there was a moment on the game where there was like audio happening. So the game was talking to her, using audio to talk to her. And she did not know like what to do. And I felt bad. I immediately felt bad, but I felt bad for a multitude of reasons. So in this, what she had to do to communicate, she set the controller down and then started signing. And I immediately felt bad, because I'm just thinking about like how violent it might be, first off, to silence someone, to literally, not figuratively, but literally silence somebody, right? So we'll be mad if like somebody just came and covered our mouth up. Well, with masks, that's different. But y'all know what I'm talking about. Like mask, wear your damn mask. But like if someone was like really prevented you from like speaking. I feel like that's what I did when I put that controller in her hand. And I didn't even realize it like at the time, until she was just trying to explain what was happening like in that moment. So here was like a moment where the technology first hindered her ability to communicate and engage in the space. But then, I quickly came up with a solution, because we had the Kinect, the Xbox Kinect, for those who don't know, the Kinect, you like uses like your body is the controller. So it like scans, there's some problematicness also too. The book will tell you about how racist that can be. Y'all know all about this now, right? Y'all know about how like racist these like, facial recognition like technologies are. Go ahead, Nick, go ahead.
We've been having conversations about Respondus Monitor and the facial recognition proctoring services and stuff on campuses. So yeah, so yes, Yeah, the
Oh my gosh.
the racism embedded, programmed into the algorithm is definitely
Absolutely.
something we've been talking about here.
Absolutely. And gaming told us this stuff back in 2011 and 12. Like gaming was really like a precursor that let us know that all these technologies that people were like developing and using was going to be so problematic, you know. So, but aside from the problems, you know, the Connect really enabled her to like keep her hands free and allow her to like engage and communicate in space. Well, that little that moment like in my lab, you know, sent me really down like, you know, like a rabbit hole, if you will, of like really understanding like, well, what has the experiences of other, you know, deaf gamers been? What about other disabled folks? You know, what about like, you know, people who have, you know, who don't have hands? Or what about, you know, people who are like blind? What does the gaming space then look like for them? And then also what are like the narratives? What are like the, you know, the disabled narratives like in games? You know, what kind of like model are they putting forth? And so, you know, I went down like this deep dive and I was just really like I guess, you know, my privilege, you know, in my privilege, I was very shocked, right? In my able privilege, I was like, oh my gosh, you know, I did that thing. I'm, you know, but of course, this is the reality, right? You know, and there was like a mass exodus out, you know, as soon as like, you know, these technologies started becoming like more limiting and like incorporating like more technology, like they got too fancy, but then the accessibility issues like just started to be like exacerbated, right? And so I think that that's what's like really like fascinating about, you know, the concept of like intersectional tech. I know that question's coming. I'm so sorry. And I'm gonna let you answer that question. But I think that's what's like so fascinating about the concept of intersectional tech, right? Because it simultaneously thinks about like the body and the technology too, right? So when we think about, you know, our identities and you think about intersectional identities, you know, oftentimes we think about like, you know, the most minoritized and most marginalized experiences, right? So if we think about what's the experience of this black woman who identifies as like deaf and who identifies as like a socioeconomically like disadvantaged person, so think about that. So she was like, at first, I don't have the money, you know, to keep up with the gaming space, and second off, if I were to buy that Xbox, I'm not just buying that Xbox, I have to buy other things, other tools, so I can participate, so I can even like engage. You know, if we think about, you know, I remember did some interviews like with the Quad Gods. So the Quad Gods is like a group of quadriplegic folks who are like gaming, and they were telling me the cost of to just do minimum gaming, because this controller is useless for them. It's useless, and so they were just, you know trying to make connections with like folks in like the industry to say, hey, how about, you know, let the core like allow somebody to identify, you know, pick the controller that they want and need to use. Like, don't just automatically assign this one, because really it's like a waste of money because they can't even use it. Like, allow the adaptive controller, you know, allow them to get access to that, allow them to use like some of these other tools. But whenever they were telling me just how much it was, I'm like, this is like truly like an intersectional problem, because a lot of us don't even talk about like the class context, you know, either. I'm shutting up, Nick. I'm so sorry. Let me shut up so you guys.
No, this is great. This is great.
This
This is great. For those of you who don't share my monitor, like I've got a set of questions that I shared with Kashana beforehand, and she's just like blown through like 5 or 6 of them. So it's great. No, and it's got me thinking too about like things adjacent to gaming. The way accessibility gets rolled out as a side effect of capitalism.
Ooh.
So like advances on an HIV vaccine in the wake of a COVID vaccine, or just the general sort of like advances in UDL once it's shown, oh, well, this is something that able-minded people can benefit from as well. I'm thinking particularly about alternative and augmentative communication users who will use, like today, iPads can often form that function where people can type to speak and whatnot. But before iPads, many AAC devices were prohibitively expensive because they were only made for that niche disabled user market. But now that they're iPads and it's cool and everybody wants an iPad, the cost of that accessibility goes way, way down, which is a great side effect, but it's terrible that we have to wait for capitalism to,
That's right. Or we have to wait for the mainstreaming of the thing for it to be like, oh, okay, everybody. And this reminds me of like a conversation, especially whenever I had to go like online, like real quick, like for classes, right? I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about how much like our disabled students have been like begging for alternate formats and alternate modalities. And then people say, no, we can't do that. I can't do that. If you're going to take this class, like the ableism that's like just so inherent, like in that. But then all of a sudden, like, the COVID said, oh, well, we're going to fix this real quick because we're going to make y'all have to like do it and make these classes like accessible. They did it. And I was just, but it's one of those things, once it starts impacting like everybody else, then we're start thinking about, the folks who are like the most, marginalized, from these kinds of things. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
No, absolutely. Let's see, where do we go from here? So we've talked a lot about disability. I want to shift us into race. So obviously you've written the Black Lives Matter movement is super important for your work. Super important for intersectional tech, which came out in 2020. Yeah. Given the prevalence of that movement over the past 12, 14 months, what additional insights or questions has 2020 and 2021 given you about race and intersectionality in tech that didn't make it in the book? Like, what are you thinking about right now?
Oh gosh, so much stuff that didn't make it into the book. Well, you have to think
there always is.
I know, right? I was putting the finishing touches on that book like in like February.
Yeah.
And that's like, I think Chicago had shut down right there. And I was like in my mind, I'm like, oh, this gives me a great time like to finish the book, right? I had no idea, I had no idea what I was in for. But I'm sitting here thinking about, I feel like that COVID is glaringly absent, and I think that there were a lot of things like to be said about, how all of us, like we started to like rely on gaming, and think about like how even the national conversation like around gaming even changed, whenever game, like, oh, everybody's playing Animal Crossing. Oh, we love gaming now. Like, you do? Really? Like, when did this happen? Like, oh, okay. Because last year y'all was just blaming gaming like on something else. But anyway, but I think it's I think that the what happened like over the summer was like part of like that conversation that I've been having like around gaming. So if I we would have to like go back and link the moment from what happened with like with George Floyd back to like what happened like with Mike Brown. I'm thinking about August 2014, the reemergence of like Black Lives Matter, and the interesting thing about that moment is that, the reemergence of like, Black Lives Matter and the movement like for Black Lives and all the adjacent movements that came out from it. It happened like in tandem with Gamergate. And I think so a person, like me, who's like deeply connected and like embedded and invested, right? Like in both of those, it really was like this moment where, we had to like pick one, right? Either pick your gender or pick your race. Because I mean, let's be honest, the conversations around Gamergate were about, like, this harassment's happening to like white women. Like, oh my gosh, we gotta like rally around, like protect white women, right? Because nobody could really understand like the intersectional context in which so many like women of color were like experiencing Gamergate. Because they couldn't fathom that, right? Because we don't have, intersectional like kind of thinking. I remember this really powerful write-up, a Muslim woman who's like in the gaming community, she wrote about the invisibility, the invisibleness of like all the things that she has to go through. She's like, first off, I was rendered invisible, because of sexism, because you don't see the things that's happening to me as like sexism, because we've narrowly defined what harassment and sexism like kinds of means. And where, like I'm even thinking about, a lot of like the tropes and stereotypes or the cliche, whatever, like, the tropes that come in about, there was like literature that I went down about how, like Black women can't be raped. And, like, excuse me, I just threw that out there. I'm so sorry, I didn't provide like a content one, but I'm thinking about, all of these like assumptions of that women of color are not like afforded, for instance, that white womanhood's like afforded. So that's why, we didn't even think about, what's the experiences of like women of color, like in this space. Right. But also like with Black Lives Matter, of course, the thing that emerged was like, okay, these Black men are, are victims of like violence. We weren't even thinking about, like what Black women and the Black trans community, was like also like experiencing like the police violence and the brutality and the overuse and abuse of power. So here we have, we got Rakia Boyd, we got Sandra Bland, we have all, we got the hashtag Say Her Name movement had to, like emerge, in tandem, with the Black Lives Matter movement, because it was co-opted, by like a narrow definition of like what Blackness is. And so, and then you have like a whole, you know, all these women and trans folks, you know, intersex folks, you know, who were just like, well, what about us? Because we are not legible to like any of these movements. And so I really thought about, you know, what that looks like. So I'm thinking about it might be chapter 4, Me Too, Me For, like women and misogynoir. So that was supposed to be like a chanty kind of thing. You know, I remember that was like one of the rallies that I was at, you know, that was like me too, me for something and misogynoir. It was something that Black women were like, you know, like saying. It was a beautiful chant. And I should have probably put a little more context into like, you know, the name of that chapter. But anyway, you know, this was really like that moment. And I can never remember what I put in the book and what I put in like articles. But anyway, I'm going to share a story. It might not be in the book, but that's okay. But there was like a group of women that was following like in the gaming space. Mm-hmm. And they were together playing Mirror's Edge. When was it Mirror's Edge? Oh, I might be mistaken. It might have been like Batman Arkham Asylum, but they were playing like one of these games. I can't remember how they talked about it. Was really significant, but they were in the space playing whenever they got the news that the officer Pantaleo, who killed Rekia Boyd, was let go, like when he was let out. So it was like really like this significant moment where, you know, they heard the news. So the game is playing, but then they're also, the Twitter feed is like happening like on the computer too. And then the phones are dinging. You can hear phones and texts and like alerts, and like people are on Facebook and people are talking about it. And they were like, oh my gosh, you know, I think the line that one of the women said was, and that she texted me. I got a text message also from another woman where they said they let this fucker go. Right. And so immediately, like in that moment, she was like, I could only do one more game. Because we were going downtown. So these were the women that I was playing with who were in Chicago. I wasn't in Chicago like at the time, so I didn't join them there. But they immediately went downtown, you know, because they wanted to have a presence there. And so it was like in that moment, it was so beautiful because these women are like, we're in different cities. And so immediately there was a woman like in Baltimore. She said, well, I'm gonna find out like what we're doing. And this was like the precursor to like say her name, right? But I remember there was a particular rally like in New York, and people were upset that nobody showed up. Right. You know, it was completely juxtaposed, like from the rally for Mike Brown or Eric Garner or Freddie Gray and all of those cities, like nobody showed up like for Rekia Boyd. And I think that was like the energy that really like mobilized like the Say Her Name movement. But it was just so interesting that these women who identify as like gamers, you know, saw this and like were a part of that, you know, the steam that like mobilized like into that movement. But there was a really powerful line from one of the women who were in the space. She said, I really feel like a space invader. Like I really feel like I'm taking up too much space, like in these movements, because whenever they, you know, they raise their hands, they're in these organizing meetings, they say something in those spaces, or even with the women's march, you know, a lot of those women, you know, a lot of these women are active, you know, so they participate in a lot of these things in their cities. And so they also felt like, you know, with the women's march, there was like, you know, on the website, it says that they're intersectional, but in practice, that's not what's happening at all. And, you know, they really felt like they were like space invaders because they were like, nobody was like listening or like paying attention to like, you know, these women of color who were like in their space. And so they were like, you know, it really makes sense. I guess we just have to like start like our own movement. I have no idea what question you asked me, Nick, but I'm just kind of going.
No, I think this is great. So I want to ask you one more question from, you know, yes, my list. And then I want to go to, to Martha's question. We'll open up Q&A. Yeah, chat's happening.
Okay.
So last question from me, and then we'll open it up. So again, this is if you're familiar with Dr. Gray's work, you already know this, but for those of you who are coming to this conversation fresh, her work really centralizes fans as users, like you use that phrase in the books, the centrality of fans as users of digital culture. So it's more about gamers than it is about the games in and of themselves. It's about these conversations that happen. So two questions. One, what do you think the analytical advantages of centering fans are? And what do you think of the political and activist advantages of centering fans?
I like that question.
I think it kind of gets into Martha's question too. So,
yeah. Okay. Awesome. That's what's up. I think I love using that term like fan. Because of how sticky the word gamer is, right? And I was even conflicted with like using, I don't think I actually used the word gamer on the book. Do I? You've got the book there? I don't think
I'm not sure that you did.
Oh, I didn't.
And,
so even, I'm thinking about like
yeah.
on the title.
Oh,
Yes,
no, no,
that's
no,
how it
no,
was.
no. On the it's not in the title. It's not in the publicity. It's occasionally used in,
Absolutely.
but mostly it's yeah.
Absolutely. So
Users,
I wanted
fans. Yeah.
absolutely. So I wanted that definition like to be broad, right? Now, why would
Mhm.
I do something like that? I'm thinking about, how like a particular segment of the gaming community has co-opted the identity of a gamer, right? And a lot of times, like the identity of a gamer is a very toxic one, right? It's defined like in toxic ways. These are like the folks who are part of like Gamergate. And these are like the folks who don't see like women and other populations as like equal and equitable like gamers like in the space. So I was intentional, about using user like
Mhm.
using the word user uh, because of that. But also, I'm thinking about the multitude of things that folks do in this gaming space, right? So there was like a group of
Mhm.
folks that I was, interviewing, right? So these are like black women who identify like as mothers, and they're in the space because their kids are in the space, right? Now they spend. So if we were to go by like traditional like definitions, like how often are you like on Xbox Live? So I think that I remember seeing like a survey where folks were like, it was like an addiction survey or something, and people wanted to know how many hours they spent on Xbox Live, right? It didn't distinguish like what you're doing when you're online, right? It just says
Mhm.
how often, how long is your device on, right? Now, so there was this woman. She said, now this is going back to the methods thing. This is like the limits of the survey research, right? So somebody can
Mhm.
say, well, I spend about 6 hours a day on this Xbox, right? But nobody's unpacking that. So asking like that question, I found out from like a lot of users. First off, they don't use it just to game. Like these are like multimodal, multi-mediated like devices. So the mom, she was like, well, I bought this. This was like the compromise. It's like I bought this for my son so he can play his games, but I also needed like a place like so I do like Netflix, and I
Mhm.
I have like HBO Max, so I use like all these apps like on it as well. But I also use like the communication features. So he's like, well, I could talk to like friends. So their kids might be playing one day, but then the kids' parents will get on, and then like they have like their own like community and everything too. So one might see this Xbox is always being on and log all like these hours, but there are like a diverse range of things that are happening like in that space. So but also, not just that, but also there are some people who aren't active players. Right
Mhm.
within the space, right? There are some people. Think about like the multitude of ways that we can consume gaming content. Yeah, I know. I'm sure everybody in this room done watched a YouTube video of some gamer, even maybe by accident. We don't watch the stream somewhere, or we've heard of like the space where we're just kind of like watching, right? And I think that game studies hasn't done like a good enough job of like incorporating that the
Mhm.
fans and like the people that are adjacent to gaming like in meaningful ways, right? Because it's people are like, well, that's a passive, inactive kind of like interaction. We want to know about the active people like in the space. Well, think about streaming community, where there would not be this happening streaming space if it weren't for the people who are watching and tuning in, if it weren't for the followers and the people who
Mhm.
are like tuning into their favorite streamers. So I think we really have to like think about how we're like defining like these folks. So I loved the concept of like fan, because I had to I was trying to help a parent. So when I had my gaming lab, I did like a lot of like intergenerational gaming outreach, kind of stuff, so older folks could understand what the younger folks were doing, right? And so there was like this moment, where this grandmother, she was like, I don't know why he just sits there all day and just looks at this YouTube. And I asked her a question. I was like, because I knew a little bit about her. We had a
Mhm.
relationship when we developed. I was like, well, Miss Pet, you watch Real Housewives for hours, don't you? You watch Love and Hip Hop for hours, don't you? You watch Survivor for hours, don't you?
Mhm.
And she was like, well, yeah, but that's just TV. I'm like, well, think about this as like the same thing. He's just watching that YouTube in a way that you watch like your stories and like your
Mhm.
reality TV. He's doing the same thing. And so I think that, that really opened her eyes to be like, oh, okay, well, I understand this. Or even like, her husband, he spends a lot of time watching football, watching like sports. I'm like, he's just watching a thing that he enjoys, liking to see. So I think that I wanted to be just inclusive with like how I was defining like this community, really to kind of dismantle like a lot of the stigmas, really, but also just so people could understand just how vast these communities and these spaces are now. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's fantastic. All right, so let's open it up to chat. We've got a lot of questions queued up. So if so let's see. I think the easiest way to do this. So I'm going to start with Martha's question. from earlier, and Martha can already unmute herself and turn on her camera if she would like to. So if you'd like to ask that question and hop into the conversation, please do so. There she is.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking about this intersection between gaming and activism, and whether or not there's a resonance between those two, whether or not the kind of mindset that tends to appeal to people who game is also echoed in the mindset that results in people being having an activist mindset and feeling the need to partake in those experiences and that work. I just think about gaming. To me, gaming is a little bit about the need to shape and control and move something forward through my own actions, right? And that to me sounds like similar to the kinds of things that draw me to activist work. So I'm just wondering if that's something that you've investigated or talked about.
There is that connection is very slim, right? Let me share. I want to share a quick story. I promise it'll be quick. There was this person that I've been following for a long time. I can go ahead. Khalif Adams. I think he interviews me. I interview him. So I've shared this story often. So Khalif Adams is a Black man. He has a fantastic podcast, Spawn on Me podcast. So I've been able to see his growth. Right. He's grown like a whole lot. When Eric Garner died, he had a moment where he was, just like, what am I doing with my space? I have a huge platform. I can reach tons of people, tens of thousands of people. Now he's millions, I'm sure, but I can reach tens of thousands of people. And I never talk about issues impacting like the Black community. So I see, and so he just had this moment. He was like, I've got to do something. I think he had like one of the first like Black Lives Matter streams. I think he was using his stream to raise funds for the Eric Garner burial. But he was like, in that moment, Keyshawn, I just realized that my life as a Black man, my life as a gamer, they were distinct spheres and they didn't interact. They didn't intersect like at all. He was like, I'd always done activism. I always was present. I always was doing stuff like in the community, but I never brought any of that like into that gaming space. So I think maybe a lot of the opposite happens. Now, this is not the case like for Black women. So those stories I was sharing, a lot of these was like black and brown women, who were just like, they're activists wherever they go. Right. And so they're in gaming, but the core of them is like, doing actual work, like on the ground, like in the community. Right. So they are not representative of like most of the gaming community, like at all. I don't want folks like to think that at all. But I think that, Khalif's example really just serves as like a good way to like see how people see their gaming space. So a lot of people want to like protect that gaming space and be like, okay, I'm Black in the world, but in here I am noob 225 and I'm gonna whoop your ass. Like a lot of folks are just like that, so it was like their escape. It was a place where they could like release. They could, they were like, I had to deal with these Karens all day. So now I'm in here and I don't have to, I'm dealing with other things. But those worlds were like very like distinct. And a lot of people, a lot of gamers, especially a lot of gamers of color, even like a lot of women of color, too, they really wanted to like protect that gaming space. So you don't really see like a lot of that overlap. You also have to think about like the gaming technology punishes a lot of just like social media, digital media, like all these tools, they punish folks for like engaging a lot of this stuff. So just think about, I was just writing a paper, with my graduate student, Kristen Stein. We're writing on the phenomenon of like getting zucked and how like a lot of like, black women in particular feel like that they are overly and severely punished, for the things that they put, out there in the space. If they're talking about activism or talking about like whiteness and white supremacy, then they feel like that there's always like this microscope on them. Well, they feel like that they're unfairly targeted, right? So it's like these carceral logics have like, seeped their way into like these digital spaces. And the same is happening in like the gaming spaces. So I'm just thinking about, the concept of like being banned. So many Black folks have stories about how they'll do a little thing and then they get banned. And then we were trying to like figure out, well, how does that happen? Why does that happen? Well, I want to share just like a little bit. There was a time where, a lot of these gaming spaces wanted to do like zero tolerance, like for like, racist speech, like, so the N word, right? So nobody could say the N-word. I'm like, well, if they had somebody like at the table that could, inform them of what the impact of that policy would be, they would have known that it would unfairly target Black people who use the N-word in their everyday speech practices, who use this word as a way, they communicate, with other Black folks. And so it was those folks who were like getting banned, like for this. I was one of the ones that got banned too. When I was playing Friday the 13th, I think, I share this story like all the time about how like I got banned like in the space, like for somebody had called me the N-word, and I asked them why they called me the N-word, and I spelled it out in text. And so, the algorithm crawled and looked for it, right? And I got instantly banned, so that's essentially, kind of like what happened. But I think that, I understand like this, what you're thinking like in that question, but I don't, that's not actually like translating like in the space here. Cause I think the terms of service is very restrictive too, like with a lot of things that folks can do. So I'm thinking about how like on Twitch, there was a time where on Twitch where things are dinging. I'm so sorry. Hopefully that's not impacting y'all. I don't know what's dinging. Can you hear that, Nick?
Barely. It's
okay.
You're fine. You're fine.
Okay. All right.
It's the soundtrack of 2021. Just always notifications.
Absolutely. But that's a fantastic question. But I don't think there's like not that direct correlation. But I think people who are like activists like in their physical lives, they'll bring that like into their gaming space if they do, if they have an affinity for that anyway.
No, that makes total sense. And what you just said reminded me of this story that I had read. It's fairly recent. I think it was Fortnite that added these filters recently that were like, I think it was Fortnite. I can't remember, but they added these filters that were like, would you like to hear racism or not hear racism?
Oh, yes.
Do you remember this? That. Like, yeah, it just came out. Like, and it was kind of like, what?
Yeah.
Why would anybody think that was a filter you should add? Yeah.
That was IBM. So it's not in Fortnite, but I think
it's not Fortnite. Okay.
This is like a tool that IBM, I think they're trying to propose for.
Okay. That's what it was.
Basis.
Yeah.
It's like a meter. It's like a filter. You want to hear a lot
of
racism?
Yeah. Like, how much racism would you like to hear?
Right. It was wild. It was so wild. Yeah. Like it was really like an episode like Black Mirror. I'm like, this would be a fantastic.
It was.
Yeah.
Totally. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martha. Appreciate you.
Yeah. So a couple questions in the chat from Alyssa and from Kathy LeBlanc talking about things that are stereotyped as women's games like Farmville or idle games of various things that they're often called. So I don't know if Alyssa or if Kathy want to jump in. I guess I can, where's my participants tab? You're both allowed to talk. So if either of you want to jump in with your question.
I guess I will jump in. I was saying in the chat that I had an experience where I was doing some research about Farmville and talking to women about why they were spending hours and hours playing this game, and read a paper by a scholar who talked about the essence of Farmville being you just click on things. And that wasn't the experience of women. They spent a lot of time with designing their farms and, planting different kinds of crops. And it was a very, very different experience. But he had defined essence in a way that negated the experience of those women. So I guess, my question might be, like, how would you deal with situations like that? Because that's clearly like a white man saying, this is what this game is, as opposed to allowing people to experience the game in the ways that make sense to them.
That's a fantastic question, Kathy. First of all, I want to shout out Shira Chess. She's an amazing scholar who does like a lot of work on like casual games and like debunking like a lot of that stuff that is so prominent like in game studies, right? But I think that fits really like a lot of like the narratives that you see of how people have gendered, the gaming spheres, and they really think that hardcore spaces are like full of dudes and full of testosterone and angriness and like shooting and fight but it's an extension of even like I'm thinking about like the girl games movement like of the 90s, all the Barbie and pink and purple games, and there was and and these companies, I just feel that they're like, so out of touch. And then a lot of the scholars too are so out of touch because they're bringing the same gendered assumptions like into like a lot of the work that they do, right? So for instance, like, a person like me and all the women like me who are like, playing like shooter games, they see us like an anomaly. Like, we don't really, we're like a one-off. Like we don't even really like exist in the game, right? We just haven't gone back to our roots of loving casual games. So we have to go back, to the farm or go back to the kitchen and, like play those kinds of games. But I think that, that's why I'm big about, dismantling those hierarchies and those structures and expanding and broadening up, just how people are thinking about the games. Because I'm thinking about, most of us think about like all these so-called hardcore dudes. I remember talking to somebody and he was like, I play Candy Crush all day long at work. It's only when I get home, that I'm back to like Call of Duty. He's like, like my farm or my kitchen. I'm thinking about like some of the Flow, like Cooking with Flow. That was like a real popular game at the time. And it was like, I'm cooking all this food. Like I'm like beast mode, like in this game. So, but I think a lot of folks, we also have to think about when the context of time also and how people like use their time, I think doesn't get factored into these spaces. So even like people, so for instance, that person that was talking about his gaming experiences, he might not count that as like gaming, because he's trying to pass the time at work. Whereas the real gaming for him begins when he gets off and gets home and gets on that PC and gets on League of Legends. And that's like his real gaming time because that's how he defined, gaming and time like for him. So I think that a lot of what we need to do is just really like, just like I did, with that, going beyond, what that survey asked about the time that's spent, we got to ask like some deeper questions. I think that's really like, I didn't finish my ethnography statement. I'm so sorry, but I think that's what really like ethnography like affords, because we're able to provide like nuance, right? So if we think about like this term like essence, I would want, he needs to unpack essence and like, what are you, meaning by that? And then I don't know why folks like spend so much time, differentiating between like that casual and hardcore space too. It's really just a replication of those gendered practices that really mean nothing. They really mean nothing, especially when we're thinking about, how people actually like spend their time. But also, who defined, the hardcore spaces like this, like shooter space? Like I would never dare play, like, was it Words with Friends? Like with my sisters, they are some hardcore ladies in there. I listen, I'm not quick enough with the words. Like listen, I left crying in space like one time. That's some hardcore gaming. I think it's really, I wish we could define these things like better. Because hardcore should, there's nothing strategic or involved with me pushing a button to shoot a digital gun. There's nothing involved with that, right? I'm think about how like strategic you have to be like to play some of these like other games. Farmville, that's some intricate stuff in Farmville. I'm not good at that, because so I wish we got to do better, Kathy. I'm so sorry that you came across that work, but there's a lot of that work out there, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. And just adding in with that, like the complexity of like the things you can do in Farmville or other games, like there's a long tradition of digital users making like guides and FAQs and sort of like creating teaching and research materials.
That's right.
For no pay for the community. Ooh. For games going back. I mean, this stuff was on the net for Nintendo, right?
That's right.
Like,
That's right.
I'm thinking of the old.
We don't talk enough about that. That's great. That's a great point, Nick. We don't talk enough about that content.
Yeah, like the history of the I don't know, is the game FAQs site still GameFAQs?
Oh
is that
my
still
gosh,
running?
I remember that site. I want to go Google it right now.
Yeah, because people would put out 30, 40, 50 page guides on any console game you'd ever thought of.
Yeah.
And like the amount, even if they're considered idle games, the amount of analysis and research and use that people have been doing for decades on these things is absurd. Yeah. Martha points out, I play an idle game every night while we watch TV, and you can find a website with a cheat tip page for every single level of thousands of levels. Yeah. Absolutely. So like people are clearly, I'm flashing back to you you were talking about another scholar who was talking about passive recipients of gaming, or like passive YouTube watchers, things like that. And that, like, it's what's great about interdisciplinary work, because the notion that someone passively receives media in so many fields just is dead in the water. Like that doesn't fly. The notion of like a passive spectator or a passive reader. Does anybody else have questions for us? We've got about 10 minutes left.
I think Words with Friends got folks excited.
Yeah, no.
Except my aunt will slay me in Words with Friends. I know.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I cannot keep up with Words with Friends.
Oh, I love it.
Well, while people are thinking, something that I saw that you were talking about on Twitter recently that I've wondered about, the phenomenon of rage quitting.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, rage quitting in general, and I think you were talking about like, is this like a toxic white male masculinity thing? Which I like. Yes, I'm on board for that. But the notion that it's for gamers in competitive hardcore settings who quit rather than lose. Often to the detriment of other people who are playing like a multiplayer game. Like you can't finish because this guy rage quit. So I don't know, thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to know if there was like any scholarship, because I was trying to like figure out a way to like, contextualize it. But it turns out there isn't much written about it, right? So I got to thinking like with some like, industry kind of friends, and they were like, there for them, I think it was actually, it might be okay to say, there was somebody that Jess Tompkins, I think, retweeted it, and she said, this is a fascinating concept, and the way that they as a designer like would think about it would be like, how can we design and create tools that would like reduce like the harms of like rage quitting? So how can we create, more of like grace quitting? Like, does make sure that every game has like an option to like vote, like, hey, I want to quit, y'all. Everybody vote, so we all can like quit, right? But there was also, they've been like collecting like data on this and like trying to like figure out like what's happening behind it. So they're like, getting kind of systematic to see, okay, did a person like use like the gaming system to like actually quit, or did they lose connection? And like, there's no way to know like if a person like if their internet just kind of like cut out on them, or if they like pulled the plug literally, right? And those are like, I didn't know that there were like entire there's like a science behind like how to quit, because so many of these people want to keep their stats up, like these leaderboards, and like maintain like their numbers like in the space. So somebody had like even like reached out to me. I think it was like one of my colleagues, Gabriella Richards. She had reached out to me and said that there are like people who were like coached, like these esports realm, where people are like coached on how to like quit like in ways that won't negatively like impact like their numbers. So this was like a whole world that I went down a rabbit hole. I didn't even know like all this like existed. There's like a whole like ecology and like science behind like how to quit in like spaces. But the design folks are like, how can we, because cheating is such like a huge like problem in so many games, right? And so these design folks are like, how can we like reduce the harms that rage quitting actually like causes like through design? And so I think it's really like fascinating, with whatever research might come out of that, because a lot of people were like interested in like engaged. So Nick, I'm really interested and fascinated to hear your thoughts, because really like for me, I looked at it, like you said, people would rather quit than like lose. And so a lot of that, whenever I hear from like the people who come from like a sports background, like the sports, and so these were like guys, I used to follow like a group of like Black athletes, in their gaming space or whatever. They hate people that quit the game. They're like, you can't just quit, because these are guys who are like in the middle of a football game and they can't quit. They could be losing like 54 to nothing, and they don't quit. And so they've applied these same practices here. And a lot of them, they were telling me, they was like, this is they said that's white boy shit. They say, because we ain't gonna quit, but they really, got me thinking. I'm like, so who are the folks who are like quitting? I mean, I don't know if like somebody will fill out a survey and say, yeah, I quit all the time. I don't know if people will do that, because I'm sure like people quit. Like, I've had to like quit a game before because I had to go take care of my kids, but it really be good like to just get like a sense of like the different tiers of like why people quit. And like, we don't need to lump everything like in rage quitting. So rage quitting, I feel like, has been, it's a very significant, very defined thing. And, there's like a whole rage quitting, like, movement, like on YouTube of like people getting angry and throwing things. And, so I would relegate rage quitting to like a very like narrow kind of thing, rooted in anger and rooted in like a lot of that. Yeah. So
and in self-perception. And I think that notion, like, as you write about elsewhere, like the notion that the hardcore, typically white, typically male gamer, that where skill and self-perception get wrapped up. So I feel like there's something, so in those terms, I feel like there's something about rage quitting where someone is out of anger and out of like a fragile sense of self, declaring they're like, this doesn't count, because they don't want to get to that losing screen and have that reflect back on themselves.
Absolutely.
Look, Kathy's had a hand up. Kathy, did you have? Did you want to weigh in with something?
Quitting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, now I feel like my question is really boring compared to this.
No, not at all.
Conversation about rage quitting. My question is kind of about your methodology, right? You're using ethnography to investigate these gaming communities, and I wonder. So the first time I read about anything like this in a gaming space was T.L. Taylor's book, Play Between Worlds. I know, me too, absolutely. And in that book, she talks about the idea of objectivity and how it's a feminist take on ethnography to be immersed in the community as opposed to pretending to be objective. And I just wonder what your experience is in academia with the kind of ethnography that you're doing.
Oh, absolutely. The kind of ethnography I do, I would fail my methods class. So there was, I am intersectional at the core of me, right? So for instance, there are some things that, when people say that they're objective and go on there, they don't have bias assumptions and all that stuff. To me, that's hogwash, right? I recognize my power. I recognize how my presence in a space changes the space, but I also actively work to dismantle the power hierarchies. So I never anywhere ever in my work have I ever called a person who participates in any of my study. I never call them a subject or never. So the language matters, how you're framing folks matters. These folks are co-narrators. They're co-producers of knowledge. They are the experts in this field. They're the experts in this space. And so I think, how I have moved these folks to the top of things as opposed to me being the researcher and having all this knowledge. And, I'm doing all of my little, tools to finagle, try to get information or research out of it. That's not what I do. I'm forever grateful. I have a lot of I offer a lot of things, and I try to offer for folks who do all this labor, if I can reciprocate, if I can pay them, if I can do something for them, I make sure that I'm intentional about making sure that they are compensated in some way, so I'm thinking about having a reparational kind of policy, because I use Black folks in a lot of my work. I'm here you are, you are expending all this energy and this labor for me and to help me, because it's a very think about me, I'm padding my CV off the backs of these folks who really have been exploited in traditional academic context, so that's why also I write the way I do, because I want to make sure that the folks that I'm writing about can pick this up and read it, they can understand what I'm saying about their lives, so I never submit anything without these folks knowing that, hey, this is how I wrote about that interaction, are you okay with how I'm discussing it and talking about it, that takes time, right? And most people don't do that, they go in, they collect their data, and then they go out, and whatever they do is just what they do. But I feel a responsibility. I think that's why I've done ethnography for so long inside these spaces that I've been in, because I don't want to just leave them either. I don't want to do that practice that, so many that we're trained for. This is what academia, is what we do. We go into a space, we study. We might go to another space and study it. I didn't want to leave because I felt like I owed everything, every ounce of my academic career to these folks who have allowed me inside their space. So that's why this is just going to be a forever ethnography. I'm going to be constantly writing books about this, because I want to make sure that I'm doing the things that can take care of the folks who are there. So anytime that so we've developed relationships, right? And so people probably say I'm too close to my participants, right? I am. These folks are family members, and these are some of the spaces that I originally was into. So, a lot of people, use the term me search. Sure, it's me search now. These are women of color, who are mothers and who did so these are people who are near and dear to my heart because, you don't actually see their stories in other kinds of spaces. So, would it pass a methods class? No, it barely passes IRB, when people are well, what are you doing? What kinds of questions are you going to be asking? I'm I'm going to, whatever questions they want asked, I was I don't know. And so I do a semi-structured, kind of questionnaire, because, IRB wants all that stuff. I'm I want this to develop organically. I just want to be in this space. But, I can't just put that on an IRB and get it approved, right? So I got to make up some questions, but I have to also be okay with, I'm I probably am not going to follow the structure because that structure also implies power, that I'm in this space and I'm controlling and dictating like the space, and I try to like dismantle that. So it's hella stressful and problematic, but I'm just making sure that I'm staying core to what I believe, not what some methods textbook says, or not what some kind of methodology has said. No matter what I write up, I'm like, okay, I'll write the thing so I can get it published. But I want folks to know that it really is, it's like a space where I have like an ethic of care, really around like, these folks who are like, who are giving me so much, and I can only give them back so little.
And if you weren't already convinced that you need to read Kishonna Gray's work, that right there, because like that's the thing. There are so many reasons to love your work, but the way that you use ethnography as not just as a research tool, but as a teaching tool, as an activist tool, and all the possibilities there, it's fantastic. We are out of time. Thank y'all for coming. Thank you, Kishonna, for joining us. I want to do this again next week. We can't, but I want to do, like we've got to have, like, we will absolutely have to schedule part 2 at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you.
Yeah. All right. The recording of this is going to be up probably in the next day or so, and I'll have an edited transcript hopefully in the next week, my schedule permitting. So look out for that. Share it with your friends. Get the book, Intersectional Tech, Black Users in Digital Gaming. Thank you so much.